the Chinese economy is much less likely to grow very fast this decade. And in particular, it's no longer clear that it will overtake the US economy in dollar terms.
Welcome back to BVTV. I'm Peter Thar-Larsen, the global editor of Reuters Breaking Views, coming to you today from northwest London. And also in West London is Hugo Dixon. Nice to see you again, Hugo.
Lovely to see you, Peter.
So this week we are talking about Xi Jinping, the president of China. It's obviously a big party congress going on in Beijing this week. Xi Jinping gave a big policy speech on Sunday, and we expect, barring some amazing and unexpected cataclysm, that he will later this week be confirmed as having another term on the Politburo, which basically means that he will continue to be China's sort of supreme leader for the foreseeable future. Now, there's a lot of commentary about what that means for China, what it means for the economy, what it means for China's ambitions and so forth. But you've been looking at it from a slightly different angle. You've been thinking about what Xi Jinping means for the rest of the world. And so tell us roughly how you think about that.
Yes, I mean, I'm basically saying that Xi Jinping, I think the key characteristics are more nationalistic and less concerned about economic reform and growing the economy than his predecessors. And that means that apart from other things like the extraordinary aging of China's population, it means that the Chinese economy is much less likely to grow very fast this decade. And in particular, it's no longer clear that it will overtake the US economy in dollar terms this decade. I mean, a little sort of simulation I've done shows it could be almost 20% smaller than the US economy by the end of the decade. And so I'm really exploring what does that...
Which is a huge shift, right? I mean, that was always something people sort of, it was always nailed on, that the question was not if China would overtake the US, but when, and that this was sort of inexorable and everybody would have to get used to it.
Yes, I mean, I think it's still quite possible it might happen, towards the end of next decade. The first decade of this century, China grew almost 11% a year, and the second decade it was somewhere between 7 and 8%. If it only grows 4%, and okay, it might do better than that, but if America continues at its sort of more or less 2%, that it's been doing pretty much for the whole of this century, then in dollar terms, particularly when you take into account the fact that the dollar has been rising, that's what comes out of the simulation is actually 19% smaller at the end of this decade. And that has quite a lot of implications, I think, for a lot of things. First of all, it means that China has less money to spend than it would otherwise have spent. And the relevant things for the rest of the world probably are its military spending, its ability to spend on technology, and its ability to spend on its Belt and Road Initiative and other initiatives to win friends and influence countries beyond its borders. And so that that's the first thing. And then I think the second thing is that, of course, part of the Xi Jinping rhetoric is that China's victory is inevitable against a decadent West and a decadent America. If that no longer seems inevitable, then that story doesn't have so much power. And with that also then comes, if it's no longer inevitable, then countries, particularly in the region, that don't particularly want to come under Chinese leadership, don't necessarily have to. They have more ability to stand up to China. So I think that those are the main implications of the economic relative weakening compared to what the previous expectations were.
Yeah. The other silver lining you point out is when it comes to climate change. So what's the logic there?
Well, the logic there is that, I mean, China has done quite a lot to reduce the so-called carbon intensity of its GDP. But because GDP was growing very fast, the amount of carbon emissions was still going up. Now, Xi Jinping is considered by many people to be an eco-warrior, at least from the perspective of Chinese leaders. And China is committed to reducing the carbon intensity of GDP by 3.9% a year on average under the current 5-year plan. So if it grows at less than 4% and it reduces the carbon intensity by 3.9%, then carbon emissions will actually come down. And this year, they already have come down because of the zero COVID policy, et cetera. And so if that really is the case, it's possible. I mean, there are lots of ifs and buts in this, but it is possible that we may already have seen Chinese carbon emissions peaking or plateauing several years before was previously expected.
Yes, I see. So, I mean, obviously, I don't think most people probably don't think that dramatically slower growth in China would be a good thing for the rest of the world. I mean, there'd be lots of knock-on consequences in terms of raw materials and consumer goods and various other things. But at least you're able to say there are a few.
Well, it might be better for raw materials. Raw materials, I think it's clearly positive for the rest of the world. But you're right in terms of the ability to keep reducing, getting economies of scale, keep pumping out goods that the rest of the world can buy at low prices. I mean, we're not going to have a disinflationary China looking forward.
Hugo, well, Mike, thank you for pointing out some silver linings from this scenario, and talk to you again very soon.